And I've especially been thinking about that rather common saying, don't cross the bridge until you come to it. The meaning of this proverb is that we should not overly worry about problems that may come up at some future time. But these problems are not here yet, so the proverb says that we should just focus on the present and deal with challenges only when it becomes necessary. Now that got me thinking about bridges that are partially built, and about the idea of whether it's possible to cross them as they are being built. I was thinking metaphorically for Unitarian Universalists who are trying to live their values every day. But to get started, I again went to Google and I asked the all-knowing AI if it is possible to build a bridge as we also cross it. The answer that came back was both amusing and non-helpful. Because it was suggested that this would have to involve some kind of magic. I thought, come on, that is silly, because I just know that in the material world there are quite a few examples where construction crews seem to be doing just that, so at least they can do it. And then I was looking at some interesting examples of bridge building that seem to go in that direction. And one of those is our very own Zilwaukee Bridge. As you probably remember, or most of you, it was constructed with pre-built sections that were progressively dropped into the river, the Saginaw River. They were dropped by huge equipment, and they were connected to those already in place. And in this way, the bridge would be completed section by section with those pre-built components. And probably many of us, I know I do, still remember that disastrous moment in 1982 when the equipment was overloaded and a section of the bridge slumped by 5 feet. Now that's a big difference. And it took a lot of shoring up and buoying up, and they used some kind of a cement that was like concrete, but it was really more like a glue to hold those pieces together. And maybe I'll think about that the next time I go over that bridge. But as we know, eventually it was repaired. And most of us don't even think about that disaster as we cross it. And there were always construction workers on that bridge as it was being built. So in a way, they were crossing it. A much stranger case of a bridge that was built occurred in 1974. And that was when the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were still being completed. They were already there, but the inside was still under construction. There were no elevators or anything that were operational. And the high wire artist, Philippe Petit, was determined to walk on a wire between the two towers. That's a distance of 130 feet, quite a distance. There was a large team of people, including Philippe Petit himself, that were involved in the obviously clandestine task of installing the wire. None of the legitimate workers seemed to notice what was going on between those towers. So they had to make fake passes for the so-called building workers that they were, and they had to haul equipment up to the roof via the stairway. Think about the cable itself, the ultimate cable, which weighed 450 pounds, that had to be hauled up the stairs. To install it across the towers, this is really nifty. They started small. They shot an ordinary fishing line from one tower to the other. So obviously, there were people on both sides of the roofs, on both towers. And then at the end, they attached a thicker line, slightly thicker, which they then hauled to the other side. And they kept doing this with thicker and thicker lines until ultimately they had cables. So finally the bridge was completed. And this does seem a little bit like magic. They actually turned a fishing line into a 1-inch steel cable that cost 130 feet. And there was some magic involved when Philip Petit actually walked across it. If you see the film documentaries about it and the fiction films, it's quite amazing what he did. And of course he had a balancing pole. But that pole itself weighed 55 pounds, imagine. So this doesn't quite fulfill the assignment of crossing a bridge as it is being built. But since Philip Petit was one of the workers who eventually walked the wire also, it is somewhat similar. Now, in my mind, Unitarian Universalists and other progressive theologians and religious practitioners are always engaged in building bridges to a beloved society or to a peaceful world, and they are always crossing as much of that bridge in process as is possible for them. What they are doing is to lay courageous foundations for a better world, for a more ethical world. In 1990, with a new edition in 2023, the religious scholar Sharon D. Welch published a fascinating book on ethics, including a very progressive religious ethic. It is titled A Feminist Ethic of Risk. And in this book, she creates a new ethical framework for social justice in a context where people feel despair as they are faced with overwhelming problems like racism and environmental destruction. The book challenges traditional ethics by explaining that we must take social action and moral action even when there is no guarantee of an endpoint, no guarantee of success. Using the bridge metaphor, we should not just cross a bridge when it's already completed and it is safe to cross. Rather, we must use what she calls bounded power, resistance, and hope as we construct the core principles that constitute a theology of resistance. The book is an important one in contemporary theological ethics, and it rather complements the books that are about liberation theology. And to apply this ethic, we must take certain steps, make courageous statements, work individually and together to take action, even when success is not guaranteed. Today, in addition to overwhelming obstacles of racism and attacks on the environment, we live in a world where aggression by superpowers like Russia and the United States make the other side of the river over which our bridge to world peace is being built murky, cloudy, and seemingly unattainable. Nevertheless, Sharon Welch urges us to do it anyway. We must continue to act individually and together. We might make powerful statements as a group or as a leader of a religious movement and take many actions and live our values. I want to give two examples of courageous application of an ethic of risk for the purpose of peace. And both are very recent, they just happened. Here is the first. The first is from Sophia Betancourt, our UUA president, who just recently was jailed when she partook in the demonstrations in Minneapolis. But she is again. On April 16th, UUA President Sophia Betancourt joined several other prominent UU leaders and theologians in a letter addressed to the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, the President of the US Senate, and Congress members, a letter that reads in part. It's a very long letter, so I'll just read a bit of it. In 2010, they write, Unitarian Universalists voted to adopt a statement of conscience called Creating Peace that reflects our religious beliefs when it comes to military conflict and peacemaking. In it, we committed ourselves to a radically inclusive and transformative approach to peace that calls us to support structures that address the roots of conflict, including economic exploitation, political marginalization, the violation of public policies, religious consciousness, and individual lifestyles. And in another paragraph they wrote, the conflict in Iran violates all the commitments that we as Unitarian Universalists hold sacred. It sets a dangerous precedent that threatens the religious liberties that Unitarian Universalists have fought and died for throughout their history. There's much more in that letter, and I encourage you to look it up by going to Google and putting in Sophia Betancourt and April 16th, and the letter will pop up easily. My second example comes from Pope Leo, who spoke these words. The President of the United States just said that I insulted Jesus. You want to know what insults Jesus? Kicking the sick off their health care while cutting taxes for billionaires. Deporting the stranger and separating babies from their mothers. Bombing innocent children in Iran. And there is more. But then he says, I am not a perfect Christian. There has been one perfect Christian. He said all this in a sermon, a very powerful one. Similarly, we may not be perfect Unitarian Universalists, but let us continue to build the bridge we are walking on. In this case, the bridge to a peaceful society, a just and peaceful world. Let us build the bridge as we cross it. And as Sharon Welch urges us to do, let us take social action even when there is no guarantee of success. Let us continue to speak out, to write letters, to speak to our senators and congressional representatives. Continue to openly live our powerful covenantal values, and continue to make our Unitarian Universalist theologies a theology of resistance, of hope, of peace, and of love. Let us not stop these actions while waiting until somehow the bridge to social justice has been built for us. Let us build it and cross it while we are doing so. May we make it so. Let us now rise in body or spirit to sing